a lot more than I do about the Comstock, its beginning, since I've been here about a year. So I'm not going to explain to you how the Comstock was found and all that, but I do want to point out this graph, or this chart, because I think this is really important, especially when talking about the American Flat Mill. You can see that the most valuable ore was mined very early on in the mid to late 1800s. And later on in the 1900s, they were mining less valuable ores. And this is significant because around the 1900s, that's when cyanide was beginning to be used to mill. And cyanide could mill these low-grade ores that were previously undesirable. So that's the type of technology that was used at the American Flat Mill. So, as you can see, technology was changing, and people were beginning to think about mining on the Comstock differently. So engineers such as Roy Hardy and Alex Wise, they came into the area and they started to reassess southern parts of the Comstock. Roy Hardy graduated from the Mackey School of Mines in 1910 with a degree in mining engineering, and he was involved in mining all around Nevada. Alex Wise was born in Winnemucca, and he graduated with an engineering degree from the University of California. And they were backed by Herbert Humphrey, who was a local rancher and banker. And it's the mill's association with these three local figures that made the mill eligible for its relationship with important figures in history. So Hardy and Wise were acquiring leases all around Gold Hill. And they were thinking about, we can apply new technology here. And they got the attention of the Metals Exploration Company. And that company created the United Comstock Mines Company. And that company bought up all the leases that Hardy and Wise had collected. And, you know, everything seemed right for a new mill with new technology. And then on top of that all, in 1918, the Pittman Act was passed, and that subsidized the price of domestic silver. So we had new technology, higher prices in silver. It seemed like a great idea. And so the mill opened and began processing its first ore on September 1922. And this is a picture of the United Comstock's Mine Company office that was located in Gold Hill. A lot of the investors, this is kind of interesting, they were from New England area, like New York, and they never visited the mill site. But altogether, the investors invested $5 million, which is a lot of money, especially for that time. So part of what came out of their investment was not just the 2,500 ton capacity per day mill. It was this whole town of Comstock. And water tanks, infrastructure. We also had, you know, power lines and that sort of thing. This picture right here is a picture of a worker's house. So there was a whole society built around the mill. And this is another photo of Comstock City. This town site was mostly buried by the tailings of the Houston Oil and Minerals operation in the 1970s and 1980s. So a lot of this is gone. But it's a great thing that we have these awesome pictures. I have some historical photos of the construction as well. This would have been a huge undertaking at the time. This mill covered about 7 acres. Tall derricks were used during the construction, and this is probably a photo taken from one of those derricks. Construction continued into the winter, and here are two historic panoramas that show a little bit more of the construction. What I really like about the bottom picture especially is you can see a steam shovel, and that's excavating during construction. But right next to it, there's a horse-drawn wagon. So I think it's a very interesting mixture of modern technologies and 1800s technologies. And here is a close-up of a steam shovel excavating for the coarse crushing plant. Shortly before the mill opened, workers lowered a piano into one of the tanks. You can see the workers right here, and they had what was called a tank dance party. So they were having a little bit of fun at the site. We also have pictures of them having a barbecue. It was a pretty lively time. This is a photo of opening day and all of the people that were there. So, as you'll see, it's a lot of people. Oh, where'd it go? Oh no, I think it broke. Anyway, this was a huge panorama, and men in suits, women. At the end, there was supposed to be a little girl, but I guess it's broken. I'm sorry. Basically, this was a huge success to build this mill with pioneering technology. It was a kind of hopeful time. So this mill was made possible by the Virginia Trucking Railroad. This is Locomotive 25, and it's delivering construction materials to the mill site. The United Comstock Mines Company constructed a 10,000-foot-long electrified tunnel that started in the American Flat and connected all of their mining properties. So electric locomotives were used to transport ores through the haulage tunnel. And this is an example of an ore train. Ore trains could have had up to 12 cars. This is the ore bin here. Let's see, there's the tunnel. Okay, so the tunnel was designed to transport 1,000 tons of ore per day. And this tunnel, unfortunately, it was located on the northern section of the American Flat Mill, and it was also buried by the Houston Oils and Mineral Operation in the 1970s and 80s. Here's another picture. I just really enjoy these pictures. So now I want to get into the mill components, the specific buildings that were used for milling. And those include the coarse crushing plant, the fine grinding concentration plant, and the cyanide plant. Most of these buildings were connected by conveyors, like this one. And this is my favorite map. It shows the architecture and the archaeology very well, I think. And I wanted to show this to you so you would get a good understanding of how the mill was transported and processed. So the VMT spurs right here, the ore would have been coming on the spurs, delivering to building number 1, then going into 2, 3, 4, and finally 6. But this map also shows some important archaeological features. You have some cyanide drum dumps here in orange, some tailings, and the quarry, which is over here. And this is a trash dump. I think it gives a good idea of how these things were connected. This is building number 1. As you saw in the other picture, this was the ore bin. And this is where low-grade ores were brought for processing to the American Flat Mill. Building number 2 is right next to it, and it's also down here, and that's the coarse crushing plant. So the coarse crushing plant was designed to crush 2,000 tons of ore to half an inch in a 16-hour day. And it was linked to the fine crusher by a concrete framework for a conveyor belt and by an overhead crane. So this is the first place where the ore was crushed. And this is a detail of the ore bin, building number 1. Inside, it has a tipple. Probably you all are familiar with those, but this is where the ore cars were loaded and unloaded. And this tipple could turn or tip up to 4 cars at one time. So as you can see, the ore bin was kind of like a covered bridge, and it could tip and, drop about into a pocket that received about 1,600 tons of ore. That was its capacity. That's where the ore went, into an ore pocket. This is building number 3, which is the fine grinding and concentration plant. It's about 3-story tall, and it has a basement that contains launders and conveyors. So there were about 10 classifiers here that washed the product from the coarse crushing plant, and then it was placed into 5 ball mills for fine crushing. And these are the ball mills. The way I like to describe this is if you can imagine a dryer and throwing some bowling balls in there and a lot of other materials. Basically, it's spinning around and then crushing everything, but the scale is humongous. It's huge. These machines were quite large. And after fine crushing, the ore would have been transported to building number 4, which is the cyanide plant. And this is the largest building. It covered about 2.5 acres. So it contained a number of tanks for leaching, thickening solution, and for storage. I wrote out some of them right here, but so many tanks that I think it's better understood by looking at the plan view. So this plan view shows how the material flowed from tank to tank. So some of these like storage tanks, leach tanks, and tray thickeners there. It was a pretty complicated process. And I like this picture because it shows the scale of the tanks. You can see some workers down here, and compare them to the size of those tanks though, because they were really large. And they would have been connected by this piping, and that's how material would have been transported from tank to tank. So those are the main milling buildings, but there were a number of other facilities and buildings. Some were connected to the buildings that I've already talked about. The machine shop was part of building number 3. But some are standalone, like this warehouse. So the warehouse contained the storekeeper's office and a number of bins for small and large items, whatever might have been needed for work. Building number 6 was the precipitation and refining building. This is where gold and silver were extracted from weak and strong pregnant solutions. And these marrow presses were used to do that. That's a diagram of what was occurring at that building. It's here that bullion was made and stored. This is building number 7, which is the assay and superintendent's office. So the superintendent would have worked here, but there was also a laboratory in this building. And this was where the product would have been tested or would have been tested. And building number 8 is the substation that was important for managing power throughout the site. So at the American Flat Mill site, the architecture is really the standout parts of the site, but there were a lot of archaeological finds out there as well. And there's a tank hoop. The tanks weren't there anymore when they were ruined, but the hoops were, so we knew for sure there were tanks there, even if we didn't have pictures. The cyanide drum dumps that I showed on that other map, there were quite a few throughout the site because people in the 1920s didn't recycle. And an aggregate quarry, that would have been used for construction at the site, gravel and that sort of thing. This is an ordinary sardine can. There were a lot of household items found around the site. When I was there one visit, I saw ceramics. So you would have seen, ordinary things like cans, because people lived there. They didn't just work there. And window pane glass, nails, those sorts of materials. So, given that it seemed like a really great idea to build this mill at this site at this time, then why did it close in 1926? So the major problem was an overestimation of the value of the ore. And this is in part because of the geology. The landscape was sort of unstable, and the ore ended up being diluted with waste. It was also very cumbersome ore. It was sticky and clayey, and it wasn't very easy to mill. So that drove up the cost of the milling, and it made it so that the mill never operated at full capacity. So they overestimated the value and then never produced as much as they thought they would. All of those things were problems, but then you also had the fluctuation in price of silver. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Pittman Act artificially inflated the price of silver, but pretty soon it went from $1 an ounce in 1920 to 67 cents per ounce in 1924, and even lower to 62 cents per ounce in 1926. And all of these issues were too much for the mill, and that's why it was closed. So in 1924, the United Comstock Mines Company sold the mill to the Merger Mines Company. And the Merger Mines Company, just a couple years later, posted a closure notice of the mill. And when they closed it, they sold all of the machinery to the Morse Brothers located in Denver, Colorado. And this is a picture of their catalog when they were selling off the machinery of the American Flat Mill. So you can see a picture of it right here. This is really cool. So inside this catalog, you would have the ball mills that I showed you earlier, as well as other types of machinery that was used during the mill. So, yes?
The Pittman Act was repealed in 1924.
Yes.
And that was a big element in the fact that there was a very precipitous drop-off. And Senator Pittman tried hard to keep it up, but it was repealed. That was a Republican administration.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting how Congress is involved in mining operations, in this kind of way, because maybe this wouldn't have been as attractive without inflated prices of silver. But that didn't last, those sorts of things don't always last. So pretty much when the machinery was sold, the mill site became an instant ruin. There were huge holes where they had just ripped out machines. But it wasn't until the 1960s that the mill site became really popular for people to go visit and hang out and party and graffiti. So from the perspective of historic preservation, graffiti is very harmful to our historic properties. This is an adverse effect to the site. As I mentioned, the international style and architecture is unadorned, and it's plain, and it's stark. It's very utilitarian. So having the mill covered with all of these colors is not representative of that style. But there are a lot of people that really appreciate the graffiti as artwork, and there are different ways to look at this. And there are some of higher quality and some of lesser quality that I probably wouldn't want to see anywhere, historic mill or not. So this is a picture I took about 2 weeks into my job here. I went to the American Flat Mill with Dan Urbis, our geologist, Ray Geiser of the Nevada State Museum, and our contractors who we're working with for some of the mitigation. And I just wanted to share some of those in case you haven't been there recently before it was demolished. So you can see what was left, and some of the buildings were completely no longer standing, and a lot were in the process of collapsing, well, all of them really. And they're all covered in extremely colorful graffiti. Graffiti was painted on top of graffiti continuously. This is my favorite picture. This is building number 3, and I just enjoy the way the architecture stands out against the sky. This area wasn't just popular for people who wanted to party and graffiti. Photographers like to visit the American Flat Mill site. There were a few professional fashion shoots that took place here, and a couple of movies were filmed here. I think there was one starring Drew Barrymore. I don't know. So this was an attractive place. It has a lot of aesthetic, even being a ruin. So it became a cultural icon for the area. Here is a couple more examples of graffiti. And you can also see like the holes right here. So even in places that seem like they might be dangerous, people still went in and graffitied. This is the precipitation and refining building. And if you were to go right in here, in that area, that's where the bullion was stored. And this is a picture of the cyanide plant after it was a ruin, covered in graffiti, and you can also see trash all around it. People didn't just graffiti when they went there. A lot of people were dumping around the area. And that is also an adverse effect to the site and also in general to nature. So there's also more holes up here. I mean, it really was, there were holes everywhere that people could fall into. So I want to circle back to the management challenges. One of them was the urban interface. Our field office, the Sierra Front field office, is a very urban area, and people lived close to this mill, so they wanted to visit it, whether or not we put a fence around it, or we said it was dangerous, or anything like that. there were also multiple contradictory uses. As I mentioned, graffiti is an adverse effect of historic properties. Whether or not people value it, you know, it doesn't do anything for the history of the mill. Safety on public lands was the #1 reason. Sooner or later, the worry was that someone would sue, and that's unfortunate, you know, but so many accidents happen, and that's why it was labeled a liability to the US government. The number of employees per acre of the Carson City District, as I mentioned at the very beginning, my district has 4.8 million acres. And we have 3 law enforcement officers. So it wasn't feasible to post 1 officer at this mill 24 hours a day, every day, until the end of time. And that feeds into our issues with funding. Staffing is tied to funding, but also making repairs to the mill would have been expensive too. So funding is always an issue. So I have a couple photos of the demolition. So this is a before picture, and this is after. Yeah. So all of the buildings are gone, except for this one tiny piece. The contractors were required to contour the landscape, so it wouldn't just be a flat area or a hole, you know. The reason why this is still there is this is the precipitation and refining building. We were really drawn to this part of the building because it had a plaque on it that said 1922, and we thought that was cool. I mean, you couldn't really read it, but it, I don't know, it kind of spoke of the history. So we left this part here, the top of that building. We actually took out the plaque, and our idea was to make a mold of the plaque after it's restored, so you can read 1922 clearly on it, and we would put it back into this hole. It would probably be graffiti, who knows, I don't know. But we haven't been successful in making a mold yet because the bids have been too high, but we're going to continue trying. This is a close-up of that plaque, and it weighed a literal ton. It was very heavy. That's the other thing I didn't really mention a lot of, that these buildings, most of them were reinforced concrete. There was loads of rebar all throughout every single building. So they were meant to be very sturdy buildings, but as they were falling into ruin, the rebar was becoming exposed and, again, a safety hazard. So we have a plan to revegetate the site. Our botanist came up with a number of native seed mixes that we plan to plant around the area, and that is based on slope of the different parts and also the adjacent vegetation. So this is the types of seed and plant, and this map shows where each one of these is going to be planted. Planting is proposed to happen around in the winter time. It's a priority for our botany program in 2016. And planting is going to occur by hand and by ATV seeders. So we're hoping to make the site look natural again, so it doesn't always look like a demolition site. Okay, and finally we can get into some of the specific products of the mitigation that we're doing. So we have been working with Experience Design to develop a mobile exhibit of the American Flat Mill. And this would include the tabletop diorama that was specified in our programmatic agreement that we were going to build. And the exhibit is going to be mobile, so it can go from place to place. But we hope to eventually permanently install it in the Keck Museum at the University of Nevada, Reno, UNR. And this museum is the second oldest museum in Nevada. It was built or opened in 1908, and it's actually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Not only that, but it is located inside the Mackey School of Mines. So if you remember, Roy Hardy, that's where he got his mining engineering degree. So we thought it was kind of a nice symbolic gesture. It kind of made full circle that the person who helped make American Flat Mill happen, now the mill is going to be part of that university where he was educated. And I scoped out this site with some of our partners and the curator, and we figured it would be good here. This museum contains a lot of interesting geology collections, but also some mining artifacts. So it fits in well in this area. And this is a breakdown of what's going to be contained in this mobile exhibit. The first panel right here, that would be the introduction to the mill and its history. The second object here is a touch screen, but it's been designed to fit the look of the late 1800s, 1900s, so the technology isn't too out of place in that historic museum, hopefully. This is what the contractors call an activity cart, but it contains the diorama on the top portion right here that would be covered by glass. And that would be the model of the mill, the way it looked in the 1920s. This is a drafting table that would contain historic photos, like the one that I was unable to show you earlier. And the last panel would talk about the mill as ruins and what became of the ruins and why they were demolished. This is a close-up of what the touchscreen would look like, the home screen of the touchscreen. And this is a draft, so it'll look different when it's finalized. The same pictures here and there. That's not going to be like that. So when visitors come and look at the exhibit, they'll be able to touch any one of these buttons and find out more about each one of these categories. So this is a sketch of the tabletop diorama. So that's the cyanide plant. You know, each building would be represented as a model, and part of the V&T would be on it too. The left, the pictures on the left, these are just examples of models, and we're trying to do something like this. So including vegetation and topography, but also a lot of detail about the buildings. And this is another view of that same activity cart. There's going to be a rail graphic right here that'll explain all of the models and the buildings that are going to be on the top. Okay, so, I didn't do that. But anyway, the documentary is pretty much completed. It's 15 minutes of high definition video, and we're hoping to put together a podcast from what we put together for the documentary. And I actually have a trailer for you of this documentary, and it's never been shown in the public, so you should feel special. And I hope you like it. So,
You can push the button, or do you want to?
oh yeah, I'll go.
When you approach American Flat, you don't see it at first. You have to kind of go around the bend. And when you come around the bend, and then as you come down the hill, you come across this enormous landscape that is inviting. As as you walk through those spaces, the distance perspective of the piers, of the hallways as they appear now, not as they're structurally intended, but the structures create these environments where there's literally patterns and layers of hallways, of markings on these hallways, of evidence of activity. It's the perfect outlaw site. It's an attractive, there's no question about it.
American Flat was a well-watered outpost within the Comstock mining district. Not a lot of ore out here, a lot of would-be miners excavating here and there, but nothing much. In the 20th century, it became the site of a milling operation. Comstock Mill out here, beginning in the 1920s, was a large effort to build a cheap process using the cyanide milling process.
If you grew up on the Comstock and you were involved with mining families, the next bonanza, there's gold and silver in them Nar Hills, and we're going to find it.
You know, everybody wanted the good old days to come back, and there were several attempts to use new facilities, new mining techniques, new technological, innovations. New ways of processing ore to try and revive the mining economy here. And American Flat represents the last real serious large-scale attempt to do that.
It was the new hope.
And that lasted for only a few years and failed almost immediately for want of valuable ore and the right price of gold and silver.
What is unusual about this mill is the sheer scale of it. This was perhaps the largest cyanide mill in the world at that time.
This was a major piece of infrastructure that wasn't going anywhere. They were building for a long haul. I'm certain that everything that wasn't absolutely nailed down was sold off during the bankruptcy. Even to the point of selling the workers' houses and hauling them from American Flat to Virginia City or wherever else you find one.
Anything of value was taken away. And ultimately, the folks that were left without jobs likely went to the next mining town.
After the mill was dismantled, it was essentially abandoned. It had no further economic use from then until the present. But the place was never abandoned as far as people using the property.
And it's been a curiosity, you can imagine, since 1926 until present. People have been roaming in and out of these buildings and looking at the structures.
There were class parties that would take place, formal events, and other individual episodes just coming here to appreciate it, or to paint it or photograph it.
As you can see, it's kind of gone into a phase where it's become an artist's haven, where a lot of folks like to express themselves with interesting artwork.
This kind of informal use has been ongoing, and it's never really slowed down.
It's ever changing, but at the same token, it really is a physical safety hazard.
I think this is one of the more important sites from a folklore point of view.
However, there is a subculture of people who know about it, visit it regularly, will cross any barrier, tackle any line, do anything they can to get over there if they can.
As a representative of the 1920s efforts to reintroduce a bonanza on the Comstock, this place is significant just in those terms. But the fact that it's continued to be a cultural icon and that it's celebrated and draws all sorts of people.
It's one of those rare opportunities for a convergence between current use and historical significance.
Here's an opportunity, rightfully or wrongfully, for visitors to go in and interact using their imagination.
Okay, so that was the trailer. And the documentary is in the processes of being finished. And the last thing I wanted to show you was the website that we developed. And we did that with Dr. Howard Goldbaum of UNR. This is the website. I can send you the link later. I was going to go through it, but I think I'm running out of time. Let's see if I can. I just want to pull it up very briefly. So this is a virtual tour of the American Flat Mill. Howard Goldbaum went throughout the mill ruins, and he took 360-degree panoramas of 137 nodes around the mill site. And you can look up on this tour if you want to. You can look down, and you can go inside the buildings. So I wanted to take you inside at least one building at first, and show you, so the mill isn't there anymore, but you can visit it online in pretty extensive detail. You can see what was there right before it was demolished. And a great thing Howard did was that he embedded historical photos throughout this website. So when you're in an area that has a historic photo that matches with the ruins, you can see what it looked like in history and how it ended up. Yeah, so the last thing that I wanted to talk about is so this experience that Howard created on the website, we want to make it more immersive. So we are thinking about doing a virtual reality tour via a headset such as these. And I've been to UNR and met with Howard, and I've seen the same tour that I just showed you on the website on the Oculus Rift and Google Cardboard. The last I heard, there is going to be an Oculus Rift at the UNR Media Center. So students and other visitors to the university will be able to tour the mill even though it's gone. And that's what I wanted to leave you with. So thank you for having me. If I have any time for questions, I'd be happy to take some. Yes?
What portions of the railroad road bed survived the demolition?
Well, it was the two spurs, and pretty much the grade was left over. Everything, like in the video said, of value was taken. So it's mostly the spurs, the retaining walls, and a couple of areas where you can see marks of where ties might have been.
Do you know the name of the movies made there?
The movies.
Hollywood movies?
Apex.
Which one?
Apex, A period, P period, E period, X period.
Okay.
I believe.
Apex is the
It's a
name.
wonderful, terrible movie. It's a
Yeah.
time travel.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. I could look it up though and get back to you about that. Yes?
How much did this little venture cost?
I don't know off the top of my head. Honestly, the decision to demolish the mill happened way before I started here. So I was there right before it was demolished, and I'm not involved in the contract, so, because I'm the archaeologist, basically. I don't know what, yes?
Where did the mill get its electricity? Was it just off the grid, or did they have a generator somewhere?
Well, they had that substation. I'm not really sure actually. Sorry. Yes.
Do you feel like that the money that was wasted on this project was worth it?
I don't think I would put it that way. We're working really hard, and we have this whole team together to try and make really good products of mitigation. And as I mentioned, we had problems with funding and employees. Like I said, maybe from the beginning it seems like it's a cheaper option to just restore every single one of these buildings. But over the long haul, that's definitely way more expensive. Because these were massive buildings that were continually graffitied, and the decision makers had reasons for demolishing it, and it is definitely very sad that it's gone. Yes?
Alicia, how did this basically get from private ownership into the control of public lands and BLM?
That's a really good question.
They didn't pay their taxes.
I'm not sure.
Is that through the bankruptcy why the BLM came in, I suppose?
I don't really know.
Because it was privately owned, it was a private venture, but then it wound up as being a public land.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's
By taking over for taxes.
Yeah. Yes?
I'm curious in general, lands that are, have been used where there's a lot of cyanide has been dumped. Do they just bury that deeper, or do they have to neutralize it? Is it still a hazard?
All of the hazards were removed from the site as part of the mitigation, but cyanide naturally decomposes when it's exposed to the environment. So the site, I don't believe, is a hazard with chemicals in that way. Yes.
Where did the artifacts go that were found during the archaeological work? Where did they reside?
Well, a lot of them were buried in the demolition. Yeah.
But things that you recovered, like your cyanide cans and whatnot?
Those were buried.
Reburied in the site.
Is this, your exhibit going to be in the McKay's School of Mines Museum at some point in time?
Yes, it's called the Keck Museum.
When will that be?
They're hoping to have it completed by November. We may place it at other places in Virginia City first, and then in the end install it at the Keck Museum.
Thank you.